Om Shri Sai Ram. With love and humility, I offer myself at the lotus feet of Bhagwan Shri Sathya Sai Baba, the soul and goal of my life. Omnipresent Lord, respected elders, sisters and brothers and dear children, I stand before you today with a singular but significant claim to fame. I am a grateful alumna of an alma mater that was founded by the same cosmic force that founded the universe with the power of a single thought. I am a graduate of a university whose chancellor's name is so potent that at this moment in time, millions of seeking hearts are calling upon that name for strength, for help, for courage and divine intervention. This is a divine inheritance I never ever take for granted. To stand here for me today is a moment of great deja vu because it was in June of 1978, somewhere over there down the hall, under a huge tree, I waited for the Lord of the universe in human form to glide out and allow me the opportunity to behold him. Somewhere over there was the old bungalow and Bhagwan came gliding, and that's when I had my first darshan. My first close encounter with Bhagwan, however, was in the same trip, which is in June of 1978, but it was in the porch of the college building next door. Bhagwan was delivering his divine discourse for the summer course. My mother and I were waiting by the porch because we were not participants. After much struggle to stay there, linger long enough, when Bhagwan came out, there was a bit of a commotion in that porch, and we both tried to get in there. That's when Bhagwan started to walk straight towards us. And as he was walking towards me, he was looking me intensely in my eyes. And he came very close to where I stood. I have no recollection if I had a letter or not. But what happened thereafter, I could not explain. It was like, for the first time in my life, I had awoken. Something in my heart just burst open, and it was like a floodgate of emotion. I just wanted to cry as hard as I could, but I was a very self-conscious teenager, so I was trying to hide behind my mother. But a floodgate that I could not stop had begun, and at that very moment, when I gazed into the black of the eyes of the avatar, I experienced eternity, and that was the moment when my connection with the Lord of the universe was firmed. Although I saw Bhagwan for the very first time in 1978, my connection with him had begun 10 years prior. It was sometime in 1968 or 69 when I was a very little girl in the valley of Kashmir in Srinagar that Bhagwan came into my family's life. My parents were pious and devout Kashmiri Pandits, and I grew up watching my parents worship the Hindu gods. My mother worshipped Lord Rama every single day because she read the Tulsi Krit Ramcharitramanas daily, and my father worshipped the Shivlingam. But as a little girl, that wasn't enough for me. I was looking for something more. I wanted a deeper connection with God. I wanted some proof, some tangibility in my relationship with the Lord. So I remember an incident from my early childhood. I may have been about 4 or 5 years old, and at that time I lived in Delhi. One summer, the great Indian monsoon hit the Indian capital. It was late at night, and the rain was pouring torrentially, and there was thunder and there was lightning. And I was thinking inside my little head, there must be a God up there who's making this water come down. So I went into my balcony in Andrewsganj, where we lived, and I stuck out my little head into the dark sky, and I called out, and I said, Bhagwan ji, barish rokiye. I asked God to stop the rain. And as I uttered those words, it appeared as though someone up there in the sky turned off a giant tap, and the rain stopped instantly. I was spooked out. As a little girl, I couldn't believe that actually somebody up there was listening and following instructions actually. It was a great shock to me. But that day, I became convinced that yes, there is a God and He listens. All that remained for me to do was to firm my relationship with Him, and I wanted a commitment from this God. I wanted to get to know Him better. Shortly thereafter, in '68, when we relocated to Kashmir with my family, My oldest sister, Kiran, met a classmate of hers at Central School. That girl, Sushma's parents were in the armed forces and they had traveled to South India. And she told us that, in South of India, in Bangalore, God has reincarnated. The same God who came as Rama and Krishna has come back as Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. Now I want you to understand the family background I came from. For my family, visiting the ancient temples of Kashmir, whether it was Kheer Bhavani or Shankaracharya or Ganpatiyar, were very important. But if we drove by the Hazrat Bal Mosque, we would bow our heads there as well. If we ever entered a church or the chapel in the Irish convent that I attended, I felt completely at peace. So against that background, when the news of Bhagwan's advent came to us, as a family, we were so primed to receive it that based on intuitive knowing, we just embraced him. And the next thing you know, a young South Indian person with a big hairdo became the centerpiece of our altar. It was very unconventional for its times. We had not met Swami and we had not read any Sai literature. We just knew this to be the truth. So we were jubilant that the Rama that my mom read about every day had actually come back and he was on our altar and we knew him, and that's all that mattered to us. Shortly thereafter, we had a guest come to visit us. It was a lady named Dr. Sushila, and she was a guest of my dad, and she was going to stay with us for a month to sightsee Kashmir. And guess where she was coming from? Of all the places in the world, Dr. Sushila was from Bangalore. So we were ecstatic. In our young, innocent minds, we thought everybody who lived south of the Vindhyas knew that God had incarnated. Everybody in Bangalore was a Sai devotee and was friends with the avatar. To our disappointment, when Dr. Sushila came, she looked quite horrified to see Sathya Sai Baba's picture on our altar because she knew of him but didn't believe in him. So we just couldn't make out why. And there was such a disconnect in our frequencies because she didn't believe in Swami. And when I think back, I just can't help but wonder how amused she must have been when she saw this excitable Kashmiri family chanting the Aarti in Telugu, mispronouncing every second line and every second word. But we went about it because we just loved Swami. So she was a very restrained, dignified lady, a doctor, and she, did not comment too much on our faith. But after we took her around all the sightseeing spots and temples of Kashmir and all family functions, she went back to Bangalore and she sent us a thank you parcel. And in that parcel, among other things, she sent us the book by Mr. Howard Murfitt, the famous book, Man of Miracles, another prayer book, and a packet of Vibhuti. Now, what I want you to note is that Swami did not come to our lives through Man of Miracles, but when we got the book, it confirmed everything we already knew. It was a validation. We were jubilant. Yes, we knew this is God, and see, this man's research also proves it. But our journey to Swami came from intuitive knowing. As the Ishavasya Upanishad says, the self will pick a moment to reveal itself to whoever it chooses to. Against that background, when Swami came in our lives, we moved to many places as a result of my dad's job, and let me fast forward to the 1970s when we lived in Singapore, and that is when one summer my sister Kalpana, my second sister Kalpana, and my aunt Jinder decided to come to Whitefield for Swami's darshan. In Singapore we were very active with the Sai movement, and when the two of them came for 1 week stay right here in Vrindavan to see Swami during summer course, my sister had a number of interactions with Swami, as a result of which her 1 week stay resulted in her admission to Anantapur College. And for her first vacation, when she came back to Singapore in 1979, she told my other sister and I all the stories involved with being a Sai student, the opportunity, the excitement. And that is when my sister Kavita and I decided that we would also relocate to India and continue our college education at Bhagwan's lotus feet, even though we knew about the rigors of life at Anantapur at that time. So we came to India, and our only prayer was that Swami would accept us at his lotus feet. And in 1979, the Anantapur College was still affiliated to the Sri Venkateshwara University in Tirupati. Thankfully, the following year, the Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning was born. But when we came, thanks to some system misfunctions in malfunction in Tirupati, the admission process was hugely delayed. And we kept begging Swami, can we please join? And, but the principal told us that there was a strike in Tirupati and we had to follow their timeline. So it was time for my parents to go back after about a month. And when we spoke to Bhagwan in the darshan line, he told us, yes, you go to Anantapur and join in advance, and I will speak to the warden and the principal. So next morning in a taxi, my parents took my sister and I to join, only to find that nobody in Anantapur had received any instructions from Bhagwan. So I think this is a common theme in most people's admission stories, so there was a lot of confusion and chaos, and eventually we managed to get admission. After all that chaos, and what began thereafter was 6 most beautiful years of my life. The 6 physically hardest years of my life, the 6 most edifying spiritually years of my life. 6 years that turned all my assumptions about life and life goals on their head and changed my priorities completely. When I joined Swami's college, I came from a very happy, functional family, very comfortable home, and I had a great academic background. But Swami had become such a palpable part of my life since my childhood, someone I talked to in my head all the time, somebody I made deals with. Swami, I'll give up one bad habit. Please help me to get a better grade in my GCE O-level exams. Swami, please help me to achieve this or that. So I was always talking, bartering, trading, fighting with Swami, expressing my love for him, and in every single way, Bhagwan made me feel like his pampered princess when I was at home. But when I joined Anantapur College, actually I was expecting quite a royal welcome from him, considering how tight we were at home. But when I joined the college, Swami seemed so aloof. I felt myself lost in the crowd. And I also realized that I was vying with so many people for his attention. And a fair bit of time passed, and I had absolutely no interaction with him. I was feeling utterly lost. That's when Bhagwan came for the first time to Anantapur College in my first year of enrollment there. And when Bhagwan came to the college, there was so much of joy and excitement. But half of his visit was over, and I hadn't as much as made an eye contact with him. I was feeling so tormented, and I was listening to everyone else say, when Swami came by me, he blessed me, he did this, he did that. And I kept thinking in my head, was my love for Swami all an imagination? All the struggles I've been through living here, and ever since I joined Anantapur, all the efforts I made to self-improve, were they all airy-fairy? Swami didn't register anything. And when I was thinking these thoughts, I was standing with my friend in front of the dispensary in my hostel when Bhagwan came from the dining hall towards us. As he was walking through the gardens, Bhagwan held the hem of his robe and he kept looking at his toe as though in contemplation. And then looking at his toe, he climbed the first 2 steps of the corridor and he was right in my face. And in a split second, from his toe into my eyes, with those big, black, divine eyes, he looked into me and he said, "Good girl." Phew, I'd worked myself into such a tizzy. I was going crazy thinking all kinds of thoughts. And when just those 2 words came from the divine mouth, I felt so validated and relieved, and I was like, okay, everything is okay with the world now. And then began a wonderful relationship with the Chancellor, which is impossible to capture in words. Mother, father, soulmate, sister, brother, friend, and much more. Swami was everything to all of us. I remember one of the earliest interviews that Bhagwan gave us after my joining was a closed-door session inside the prayer hall in the mandir in Prashanti Nilayam. In that interview, by the way, one of the reasons I was so drawn to Swami, because in him, I saw a great advocate for women's empowerment. And in the first interview that Swami granted us, the theme that he touched upon was the power that women wield and the need to never underestimate who we are and what we are capable of doing. Swami spoke of the story about this army general, and Swami described how tough this army general was. Swami even went to describe his mustache and how he strode into this battalion of men, and everybody was terrified at the mention of the army general's name. He said his name had such power and fierceness attached to it that even the enemy was scared of it. But when the same general would walk home in the evening and say, "Good evening, dear," to his wife, and if she wasn't in a very good mood and went, and she didn't reply nicely, the same general would now be on sticky ground and very nervous and wonder, "Oh, what did I do wrong? Why is my wife not happy?" And then he would say, "How are you, dear? How was your day?" And if she just went, "What do you care?" And the general would say, "Oh my God, what did I forget? What did I mess up? Why is my wife so upset?" And then when Swami was doing this drama and explaining, he was being so melodramatic and he was being so familiar and friendly. So the natural result was 400 teenage girls. We were laughing aloud, our heads off. And that's when Swami corrected us. And he said, "Stop laughing like pishachinis." He said, "Why are you laughing aloud? Do you know how important it is for women to be mindful of when they laugh and how they laugh?" And then Swami went on to give us the example of Draupadi from the Mahabharata. Swami said, "Women wield great power to influence their destinies as well as the course of history." Swami told us the story of when the Pandavas were building their new palace. It was beautiful, it was majestic, and they invited their very jealous and unfriendly cousins, the Kauravas, for a housewarming. So when Duryodhana entered this beautiful palace, which was so beautiful, as it is, he was jealous of the Pandavas. When he saw its beauty, he was just stunned. And then Swami said, a part of the flooring on that palace was made of a translucent stone with a skylight overhead. So when the sun shone through that light, the floor looked like water. When Duryodhana was all awestruck, he was walking into this palace, he thought he was walking on water. So he held the hem of his robe a little high, just so it doesn't get wet. Now Draupadi was watching all this from the women's quarters, and from behind the screen she burst into peals of laughter, and she made a snide comment. And she said, "A blind king's son also appears to be blind." Her sarcasm hit Duryodhana's ego. Actually, perhaps he said male ego, I'm not sure. His ego so hard that Duryodhana could not contain the rage. And at that moment, the seeds of history were sown. We know what followed, including the public humiliation of Draupadi and the mother of all wars. So Swami told us, neither the whimsy of the army general's wife is advisable, nor the unhindered laughter of Draupadi. Somewhere in the golden mean lies the right path of restraint and respectability for women. Another time, usually when these interviews ended, Swami would ask us to form rows facing each other, and he would walk through all of us, granting us Pad Namaskar, accepting our letters, and speaking to a person here and there. When I was very new, my concept of Swami was, he was my all-knowing, barriers-free personal God. So one day in that prayer hall, I felt I should have a little private moment with him. And I decided I should have a conversation in Kashmiri, which is my mother tongue. So as Swami came to me, I just said, "Swami, and Swami looked at me and he continued to walk and he said, "Kat karo, pat karo." So basically what I was complaining about was, "Swami, you never talk to us in Kashmiri." And in a perfect Kashmiri diction, with no accent attached to it, he said to me in Kashmiri, we will talk later." And I want you to remember this incident, because I have other stories to relate to you later on connected with my speaking to Swami in Kashmiri. The year I joined the Anandpur College was 1980, which was the 55th birthday of Bhagwan. So as soon as November came, we were all in Puttaparthi and we had many occasions to be in close contact with Swami. One fine morning, Swami told us to arrange ourselves in rows, and he brought beautiful orange saris and started handing them over to each girl. Now in my mind, I was 18 years old and I was thinking, oh my God, the Rama that my mom read of, the Krishna whose paintings are in my house, he is giving me a sari. This is so awesome to hang out with a real, breathing, living God. I was so awestruck. And when Swami came and gave me my sari, I was a little bit unconventional in my manner. So I said, oh Swami, thank you so much. Because everybody was just doing pranam. Instead, I chose to say, thank you so very much. And then Swami said, no mention, don't mention. And he walked past me, glided over to the next row behind me. So when Swami was distributing saris to the row behind me, we all turned to face Swami. And when his divine hand stretched out to give a sari to the girl sitting in front of me, I have no idea what overcame me, but I just stretched my hand and touched his and quickly kissed it. Now, this was an act of brazen boldness by Anantapur culture standards and really very out of the box for its times. So everybody was aghast, what did this girl do? And when I saw the reaction around me, I was a bit shaken and shocked. And then Swami just looked at me, he broke into this beautiful smile and he said, Pagal. And he walked off and it was such a relief. And you know what? I took that comment as a compliment because in my madness for God alone have I found sanity in life, if at all. So I think the only craziness worth having is being crazy about God, because that's where all the happiness lies. I was quite an attention seeker as a student, and it came to my attention that some of my contemporary students at Anantapur had difficulty paying their fee, and I heard from grapevine that Swami gives money to anybody who doesn't have money. So I had this great desire to get some money from Swami. So every time we went to Puttaparthi, I would try and scheme and leave my wallet open with my 20 or 30 rupees sticking out and leave it in some public place hoping somebody would steal. My idea was if my money went, imagine my bus fare was only 10 rupees, I would go to Swami and say, Swami, I don't have money to pay my bus fare, so maybe Swami would give me money. And then in my mind, I had decided I'll keep that money safe, and I had 400 sisters who would pay my bus fare for me, borrow money, and then take this money home. So I tried very hard to go broke. I would leave it hoping somebody will walk and, empty my wallet. But no one ever stole the 10 rupees I wanted to lose so badly. Nobody took my wallet. People would come and say, hey, Karuna, you left your wallet there, man, just take it back. So I was so disappointed and heartbroken that I never managed to go broke and ask Swami for help. And then when I graduated, with my bachelor's degree, when Bhagwan gave me my certificate, he also gave me an envelope with 100 crisp bills of 5 rupees each. Because that was my dream, to get money from Swami, cash, and he read my thoughts and he knew how vain I was trying to lose my wallet all the time. The year I graduated with the bachelor's degree, the tradition was that Swami would grant an interview to the graduating class. It happened the previous few years, so when my batch was about to graduate, we were all praying to Swami to grant us an interview. Swami, we are leaving, please speak to us. And he kept saying today, tomorrow, later, Chustanu, wait, and nothing happened. Exams got over, girls went home, but a few of us, about 16 or 17 of us were left because we had to take, I had to take a train called Karnataka Express to North India, which only operated luckily once or twice a week. So we were waiting to pass time, so we came down to Puttaparthi so that we could have darshan. And on the last darshan, when we packed our suitcases, we were ready to take a bus to Anantapur. Swami suddenly came into the darshan line and said, go. We didn't even register. And actually the more interesting part of that interview was, we were about 17 students and maybe some madams, but Swami said only students. So we were only 17 girls who went inside that interview room. And to tell you the truth, I didn't even know till I came back to Anantapur that Swami had also called one of the girls' grandfather who sat on the veranda. So that uncle, he was very nice, he sat at the back of the interview. So it was 17 of us who had Swami to ourselves. And that's the closest I have ever got to Swami physically. For about 45 minutes, we were sitting at Swami's lotus feet, and Swami was giving us such beautiful advice. One of the things that Swami told us was, how important it is for us as women to be mindful of our characters. He said, the entire education I have given you, the purpose is one word, character. And he explained why character building is so important and so difficult. He said, don't take your good name for granted. To build a good character is like carrying this enormous boulder uphill. So you're huffing and you're puffing and you're moving only an inch at a time, and it's so hard to take it uphill. But if there is one simple slip, everything will come tumbling down, and what took you years and decades to carry up will crash in a mere few seconds. So it's very important for women to be mindful of the character. Wherever you go in the world outside, make sure no one passes remarks about how you conduct yourself and what you do. Now, in this interview, I was in a lot of turmoil, even though Swami was being very nice and looking at me and everything he would say, speak, and then he would ask, Henna, my sister and I were sitting at his lotus feet, Kada, Henna, and we were like, yes, Swami, who dares disagree with the Lord of the universe? But then, at one point in time, I realized I had to speak. So I just said, almost like raised my hand, and I said, Swami, I have a problem. He said, Kya? So I had a personal issue. And I didn't know whether I should speak it aloud in front of, one of them was my sister, so that was fine. But the other 16 girls or 15 girls, so I knelt up, and Swami lent me his ear, and he came very forward, and his big divine hair was brushing against my face, and he said, Kya ma, kya problem hai? So I remembered, this is a God who understands everything. So I blurted out my problem in rapid fire Kashmiri so that nobody in that room could understand what I was saying except Swami. So when I finished this outburst, Swami pulls his face back. He looked at me. He said, Pagal, kaun si bhasha bolta hai? So then he says, Pashtu? Because Kashmiri does sound a lot like Pashtu. Then I started, this was my good moment, I started crying just to get his attention. So, actually I was very sad. So my sister, she intervened and she said, Nay, Swami, you always say there's only one language, the language of the heart. Swami was so pleased with her answer. He said, yes, that is true. It was good to give him back a bit of his own medicine there, right? So he was like, yes, it is true. And then he told me, don't worry. And he gave me perfect advice. He said, you go home, you pray. Nothing will happen, you will come back. So basically, I was just complaining to my to Swami that, when I go home, my mom has other plans for me and she may not let me come back and continue studying. So just save me. So luckily, I did what Swami said. I went home for holidays. I prayed in every temple, every nook, every corner. I tied those strings of wishes in every tree so that I would get a chance to go back to Parthi. And I did. And he gave me 3 more glorious years at his lotus feet after that. When I came back and I pursued my master's program. And when I was graduating from my master's program, Bhagwan gave the graduating group another interview. And in that interview, everybody was asking Swami, oh, if I may backtrack, when Swami gave us the interview for my bachelor's program, when I told him that, Swami, you have to save me when I go home, my mom has plans for me. Swami's advice was perfect, and when the interview got over, Swami was giving Vibhuti to everybody, and as he was giving Vibhuti, he opened the interview room door and asked the girls to start trooping out. Now, everybody was surrounding Swami, so I just tippy-toed, and from behind I waved, and I noticed that throughout the interview, Bhagwan used to chew pan at that time. So he was wiping his mouth with the handkerchief, which he had left on his chair. Now, I didn't want to say it in Hindi or English, because then everybody would pounce on that kerchief. So I tippy-toed and I drew his attention. Then I said to him in Kashmiri, you mind if I take that kerchief of yours? And he pointed to the chair. He said, take it. So nobody understood what transpired between the two of us. So when everybody was busy getting their Vibhuti packets, I ran back, I picked up the hanky, which I still treasure and have with me, and it has marks of the pan that Swami was eating, the beetle juice, the red juice. And 2 years later, when we had another very beautiful interview in my master's program, everybody was asking Swami, Swami, what should I do next? Should I do master? Should I do B.Ed? Should I do write some entrance exam? So Swami was randomly throwing degrees at people, or so it seemed. He would say MA, MCom, MRS. For girls, he wanted to get married, and so on. And after a while, Swami said, all of you are so concerned about your future. Why? Swami said, you must live in the present moment, as someone said earlier on. And Swami spoke to us. He said, don't brood over the past. The past is gone, it's history. Actually, he said, he pointed to an elderly member of the staff. He said, like her, she'll always say, during my days, that's past, history, don't go there. Don't imagine and worry about the future. What will I do? Who will I marry? Where will I settle? What will my life be like? Future is a mystery. All you have in your hand is the present. The present is a gift from God. It's the omnipresent. Seize it, live it, devour it. And Swami told us why the present was so important. Swami said, whatever we sow in the present moment will determine the future. So the seed of the future lies in the bosom of the present moment. For instance, if we plant a lemon seed in the present moment, 10 years from now, we are likely to yield a crop of high potency citrus, high vitamin C fruit. You cannot expect to pluck luscious sweet mangoes after we have sown the seeds of lemon. So Swami reminded us that if there is one thing you must remember is to live in the moment, not brood over the past, not worry about the future. And we learned about the power of now, studying at his lotus feet. Before the New Age literature came, before the New Age gurus came, it was just normal practical wisdom that Bhagwan shared with us. When my group was graduating from the master's program, we were only 5 or 6 of us, because that was the first year the postgraduate program had been started. So the 4 of us or 5 of us wanted to give a present to Swami, and this was not allowed. But we had this great desire for what Swami had done. We wanted to give him a real tangible gift. So we had many secret meetings, because this was against the rules of Anandpur College. And 4 of us decided we wanted to get a robe for Bhagwan. So one of my sisters, I think her daughter is here today, Gayatri Gupta, she was the bold one because she had connections. Her mother could go out into Puttaparthi, and she sent her mother to get a dhoti and a fabric for Bhagwan's robe on our behalf. And then we knew we might get an interview this Sunday or next Sunday or the Sunday after. So we tried very, very hard to get a robe stitched for Bhagwan. The harder we try, the more that tailor went away to Bangalore or Kadiri and never came back. In the meanwhile, we got called for the interview. So we were panic-stricken what to do. So we had another quick secret meeting, and we decided we'll write a nice letter to Bhagwan and in the envelope put a 100 rupee bill and hide this fabric, because Gayatri was very skinny, in her sari, and take it into the interview room, and we'll see how it goes. So we had a nice interview, and throughout the interview, the 4 of us were looking at each other, when will we have a chance to give this robe? Because this is against the rules, you can't give gifts to Swami. So when the interview got over, and again everybody surrounded Swami to ask personal questions and get vibhuti packets, 4 of us took our vibhuti packets very quickly. And when everybody was busy with Swami, we did, which few girls have done before. We've conquered the final frontier. We dashed behind the curtains and went in the inside room, which we had never seen before, the inside interview room. And when we looked for a place to hide this gift, it is a small bare room with a single chair for Bhagwan. So we quickly hid the robe behind the chair, and we came out, and we just pretended we didn't see Swami, and we filed past him out. And even as we were filing out, Swami also came out right after us. So we ran quickly and sat in darshan lines. And just as we sat, the same friendly Swami who was so joyful inside, he came for darshan looking very serious, looking down. And when he came very close to us, he said something in Telugu about all the pillalus who kept Battali for me. cloth for me, I will make sure they fail in their exam. And there were 4 voices that said, no, Swami, please don't fail us. And everybody knew who the guilty 4 were. But then Swami broke into this beautiful smile and it became a big joke. And we got away with that as well. And that was a very precious thing for us to be able, and imagine just giving the Lord of the Universe a 100-rupee bill and saying, please help yourself to stitching charges because the tailor was not available. After completing 6 dream years at his lotus feet, Swami threw me in the world of hard knocks because I came from a very protected family environment of 4 girls and very doting parents. And then I lived in an ashram, so you can imagine how well primed I was to face the world outside. So shortly after I finished my studies at Anantapur, I got married and I relocated to New Delhi. And I started working for a magazine as an editor. That's when I saw a job as a news correspondent for Doordarshan India, and I decided to apply for it. And without any effort, I got a letter to write some entrance exam. I did not know it was a big deal at that time. Some 55,000 people all over India were writing that exam. With Swami's grace, I just passed. And then they called me for an interview. Now, this was the difficult part because I was a newly married person. I was just getting used to domesticity and balancing it with a full-time job and living in a big city like Delhi. On top of it, I had a very tough job, a demanding job with a lot of deadlines. So I kept worrying, I need to prepare for this job interview. What shall I do? So I was not even consciously praying to Swami. But one night, I had a very vivid dream. And Swami came in my dream. And in my dream, I was very articulate and clear. I said, Swami, I have an exam. I have an interview. And I have no preparation. I have no time to study. I don't know where to begin. Please help me. Swami said, you don't worry. First he gave me namaskar. He said, you don't worry. You study about Punjab. Everything will be fine. And he blessed me. That morning when I went to my office in Delhi, on my neat desk in the center, there was a Frontline magazine from the Hindu group with the cover story, Turmoil in Punjab. Now this is in 1987 and Punjab was going through a phase of great turmoil because there was a secessionist movement in Punjab to separate from the rest of Indian Federation. So this magazine is sitting with the cover story, Turmoil in Punjab, with Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale holding a gun on the cover page and 5 or 6 little inset boxes of various key players. So the moment I saw that, it rang a bell. I said, Swami told me to study Punjab, so this will be handy. I was very busy. I rolled up this magazine, I stuck it in my handbag, and I went about my business. At home, I started to read this. Now, I had not been following news very meticulously, so I did not know the entire history and geography of this issue in Punjab. But this Frontline magazine was entirely devoted to the situation in Punjab. So I read it twice cover to cover. I read up on all the key players. The inset boxes had the head of the police, the terrorist groups, the politicians in charge. I read up on everybody. And I prepared myself for this interview based on what Swami had told me. I went to Mandi House on Copernicus Marg in Delhi for my interview. When I went there, I realized, wow, this is serious business. Everybody is so who's who trying for this job. My only other preparation was to wear the sari that Swami had given me for my convocation. I knew he would protect me. So I applied my vibhuti, wore my Swami sari, and I read that Frontline magazine, and I went for this job. So when people were coming out from the interview, we all asked them, what did they ask you? So everybody gave me a topic, India's nuclear policy, the new budget, the railway budget, India's refusal to sign the nuclear proliferation treaty. I was like, did they talk to you about Punjab? They said, no, nobody asked anything about Punjab. So I was getting so nervous and my stomach was feeling woozy. So I went to the bathroom and I saw myself in the mirror. I was like this puddle of sweat. I was so nervous. So I stood there in the washroom and I chanted Gayatri and I said, Swami, I think I should leave this place because they will have my resume in front of them and it says I'm a gold medalist from the Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, and when I have no clue about any of those topics, I'll not bring you a good name. So I don't want to bring shame to my university. Should I run? Then I thought of Arjuna and all that, got philosophical, and I said, no, maybe I should just face it. And I kept chanting Gayatri so hard. So when I went for this interview, when I sat, there was a panel of 4 seasoned people across from me and a camera, much like this one, facing me. So they asked me, what do you do? And we made some small talk, and I was beginning to stop hyperventilating. And then they said, okay, now let's say you get hired for this job. If we ask you to do a story on Punjab and the situation there, how would you proceed? So as I was hearing these words, I began to smile like this is the happiest thing in my life, because I was like, thank God, I've read the Frontline magazine, I know my stuff. So I started talking like a pro, because little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So whatever I had read, I'm reeling out facts, figures, talking about the history. And they said, okay, now if you had to go to Punjab as a journalist from Doordarshan, who would you interview? Remember the cover page of the Frontline magazine? I said, of course I would interview those 5 guys in the inset boxes and Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, the chief, the head of the terrorist movement. And they said, very interesting. And they said, why are you advocating such a policy? And I said, because, the Indian voter needs to know everything that is happening and why those people are asking to separate from the Indian Union. So one of the guys, he has a smile on his face. He said, Mrs. Munshi, do you realize if you're going to interview Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, you give him time on national television, an opportunity to state his case. You're making him a national hero. People will agree. They will see his point of view. Is that how you will serve the government of India? And I was like, oh my God, yeah, he's right. I didn't think of all this. And none of this was mentioned in the Frontline magazine. Oh my God, my heart just sank. I could feel it fall on the floor. He said, what do you have to say about it? So at this moment, I said, Swami, I hold your feet. I have no clue what to do. Speak. And I said, Swami, speak fast. Your time begins now. And I heard Swami speak through me. The first words that came out of my mouth were words I don't frequently use. I said something along the lines of, momentarily, yes. It will seem like we are giving national coverage to a man who is a terrorist for most and a hero for some. But then the Indian voter has matured, and you have to realize, and I went on to argue this case like a lawyer, and none of those ideas were mine. I had never thought along those lines. I had no such vocabulary, and I found someone was speaking through me, and interestingly enough, using Russian jargon. I was using words like perestroika, glasnost, and I was like, where is this coming from? But I was liking my performance. I was watching myself perform. Somebody else had possessed me, and I was saying, wow, she's making so much sense. Whoever you are, keep going. And these 4 men were nodding in agreement with me, and they were like my best buddies. They were eating out of my hand, and I was shaking inside. Swami, you're doing great, keep going. And in the end, not to mention, it went very well, and without any effort, I was one of the toppers on that job list out of 55,000 people. Clap for Swami, not for me. The person I knew at that moment, the power that is the voice of the Vedas became my voice, because I just surrendered completely. And I said, your time begins now. Say something. I'm just tongue-tied. And then this thing started to flow. And throughout my life, I found every time, wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, whenever I just hold on to his feet and I say, Swami, I surrender to you, he just performs magic. And I'm sure you share the same sentiment. In 1991, my family, my husband and my daughter and I moved to Toronto, Canada, where I had the great opportunity to witness the beautiful Sai movement in that country, which is very vibrant. And over the years, I found myself traveling very frequently to retreats and workshops and to various Swami's birthday functions and ladies' days, crisscrossing Canada or to the US as a guest speaker. And I used to find that I always felt as Swami's daughter, that is the least I could do if somebody invited me for a lecture or a workshop or presentation or whatever. But being a full-time mom and a working woman, it was really very hard to balance so many things. So I remember one particular trip. Now I would go and, you have such little time in the West where you're living a rushed life. On the weekend, you're doing Bal Vikas, you're doing grocery shopping, you're doing your Sai Center activities. So every time I'd do an offering anywhere, I'd come home, even in my center, if I taught a Bal Vikas class, I would come home, and as I went up the steps, on the ledge along the steps, I had a big picture of Swami. I would always do pranam and offer my efforts at his lotus feet. But after a while, I would come to Parthi once in a while. Swami rarely ever gave me much eye contact. So I felt very neglected, sad. And I often, being my sarcastic self, I would offer my effort at his feet and say, by the way, do you even know me? Doesn't matter, I just love you, and I would walk off. So one time, I had to go to Connecticut for Ladies' Day, and that week was very hectic at work. So I started preparing 2 weeks ahead, making sure I would leave on a Friday night and come back early Monday morning, like red-eye flight, catch it back, and then in the morning go to work. So I had to make sure my laundry was done, my children's uniforms were ready, my fridge had enough food and lunch boxes for the next week, so nothing was disrupted. So every day I would go to bed so late and get up early. It took me like week of very intense hard work to prepare myself to take 2 days off because I had children and a home and a family. One early morning when my husband left me at the Toronto Pearson Airport to catch a flight to New Jersey and from there to Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut, I was wallowing in self-pity because I had a cold, I had a headache, my back was hurting, I had been working so hard for a whole week. And I kept thinking, Swami, do you even know me? And then my crazy mind started to work, and I said, Swami, when I read these Western people's books, around this time, a miracle has to happen in the chapter. How come nothing ever happens to me? It would be very nice if you can please make sure that when I check in, I get seat number 9. And I put that condition and I went to check in. And of course, I got my boarding card and I looked at it and my seat number was like 3. Gate number 21 or something. I was so blah and heartbroken. And they gave me my boarding pass for my connecting flight as well, which I didn't look at because I was so busy reviewing my notes on my laptop for my presentation. So I was like, thank you very much for not even doing that for me. I don't think you know me very well. So you've forgotten me. And I was feeling very sad. So when I got off at New Jersey, I pulled out my boarding card to see, okay, where am I going next? When is my next flight? And I see my flight number was something A27. My gate was 18. My seat was B9. I was like, okay, I'm sorry. I said what I said in the morning, all those mean things. But yeah, I got my affirmation. And when I sat on my B9 seat, the girl next to me was also going to a spiritual retreat. She was a Christian missionary, so we had a great talk. And when I flew back, everything, 2 flights, 2 gates, everything was a multiple of 9. So I didn't need any further affirmation. I knew Swami knows everything I do and everything I should not be doing as well. One of the nicest things that happened in my life was an opportunity to be associated with the Satyasai School of Canada because I feel that Swami knew that I had missed some fundamentals in my learning. I needed to learn them. That's why he enrolled me in an elementary school. There were many, many beautiful moments there, and I see a friend of mine from there here, which all of us have shared, but I'd like to share just a couple with you. One day, I was standing outside the kindergarten room, and a very small pint-sized boy, let's just call him Johnny, wearing a cute uniform, a tie, a shirt, a sweater, a pant, he walked to his teacher and he said, Mrs. Prem, I'm so disappointed in you. It was so cute to see like a 4-year-old little boy say that to his teacher. So she said, why, Johnny, are you disappointed in me? He said, yesterday you told me to go home and give my mother a big hug and thank her for all that she does. But when I went home, guess what? My mom was not there. So I thought this conversation was so cute. I just laughed and I walked past. A few minutes later, I went to the kindergarten room and I saw this little hero who was telling his teacher, I'm so disappointed in you, sitting in the thinking chair. The thinking chair is for children who've been up to mischief and need to sit down and think about stuff. So
I don't know what came over me. I said, "Hey, Johnny, I'm very disappointed in you. You're sitting in a thinking chair. What happened here?" And I think my words really hurt him. He just broke into a big tear and he ran to his teacher and he hugged her. And then for the rest of this day, this boy would not look at me. Every time I went to say, "Hi, Johnny," he wouldn't look at me. I said, "Can I talk to you?" Just didn't want to have anything to do with me. So I told his teacher, I think I really hurt his feelings, and what can I do to make up to him? She said, "Go in recess and talk to him." When I went in recess, this tiny little boy was eating his healthy snack, one baby carrot, one grape. So I just pulled a small chair and I sat next to him and I said, "Johnny, I want to apologize to you." So he looked at me with a sullen face. I said, "I'm very sorry I hurt your feelings. I didn't mean to. Will you please forgive me?" And this kid bolts out of his chair and gives me the biggest hugs and smothers my face with kisses. And he says, "Mrs. Munshi, we are good now. I forgive you. I love you." And I realize what unconditional love and total forgiveness is. As adults, if we could practice only a quarter of it, how easy would our lives be? Another time, there was a boy about 8-9 years old. We'll call him Ryan. He was an African-American boy. He came from a very disturbed family background, and he was always in trouble. He was always having behavioral problems, and he was always getting called to the principal's office. Very disruptive behavior. One day, his teacher came and told me that all he's doing in the class is making sure no other kid can study. He's hitting them with his rubbers. He's throwing pencils at them, he's making funny smacking sounds with his lips, he's doing everything to irritate everybody else. And she said, "You know what? I scolded him, then I corrected him, then I told him lovingly, then I asked him, 'Ryan, what is your problem?' And he said to me, "You know what? I haven't slept the entire night." She said, "Why? Why did you not sleep?" He said, "My mom and dad were fighting. They even broke a window and punched a hole in the wall. When those guys are fighting, how can I sleep?" So the teacher felt so sad. She said, "Oh my God, I feel so bad. This child is being through so much of trauma, and here I'm giving him a lecture on good behavior and self-control. What should we do?" So the teacher and I planned a trick, and I said, "Okay, I'll come to your class, and you just play along with me, and I'll call him out." She said, "Fine." So I went to the class, and the children greeted me as they do, "Good morning, Mrs. Munshi." And I said, "How is everybody?" And then I spoke to the teacher. I said, "Mrs. Ganesh, would you mind if I please borrow Ryan from your class?" So I could see this boy getting all nervous because he's used to being called to the principal's office. So he was getting nervous. He's in big trouble because history sheeter, we try to tend to label children as that. So when he came out, I took him and stood him in front of Swami's picture, the magical picture in the Satyasai School of Canada where Swami breathes, his eyes move, and he looks at everything we do. I said to him, "Ryan, I have just got a very important phone call from the school's founder." That's how he knew Swami. He goes, "Yeah?" And he was thinking the founder told me maybe to, send him home or whatever. And I said, "The founder told me to tell you that in the whole wide world, he loves you the most, and you are his favorite son." And as I said these words, I could see this child's face just light up with a 1,000-watt bulb, and he was a big boy. He jumped onto me, and he gave me the tightest hug. And throughout that day, this kid who always looked for trouble, and it was become a practice for him to get sent out of class. He was walking around with a smile this wide, and every time he'd look at me, we'd have that eye contact and the special connection because I had relayed that special message to him from his founder. Because nobody and nothing responds to anything with the same power that love does. Some of my happiest years were also teaching Bal Vikas and being a youth coordinator. For years and years, when I dealt with the youth girls in Canada, I found Swami came most often in my dreams and gave me specific topics that I should teach the girls. One time, Swami told me, "Talk to the girls about drugs." I was a bit conservative and I said, "Drugs? Swami, these are very nice girls. I don't know, how can I talk to them about girls? They are like Swami's girls. They wear white and white and their hair is tied and they are all super achievers in school. It's a bit awkward for me." But then Swami said, "No, you must talk to them about drugs. So I went to my class and I said, girls, next week I'm going to, then I thought, how shall I do it? Because I don't know anything about drugs myself, right? I have to have some knowledge. So I called a Sai devotee friend of mine who is a pediatrician, and he deals with children up to 18 years of age, and many of them are drug abusers. So I invited him to come to my class and run a workshop. So when I went to my Sai youth group and I said, girls, I think I'm going to run a class. Now don't get shocked. It's going to be about drugs. They said, really, auntie? Oh, why? So I said, Swami told me in a dream. And then the tiniest, the most mousy looking girl in my group says, that's very interesting. I said, why? She goes, because in my school, and then she went on to tell me the story, how she was on the verge of trying them because she was under so much of peer pressure. For the sake of that one child of his, Swami turned the world upside down. He came in my dream. He had my friend, the pediatrician, come over. He had the whole class listen to the dangers of doing drugs because Swami cared so much. That is why I have a great deal of respect and love for Bal Vikas Gurus, because really, if anybody contributes significantly to the future of the Sai mission, it is the Bal Vikas Gurus. And I found myself getting so involved that actually on some days I was working a 24-hour cycle with no sleep at all. So at around the same time, my husband visited Puttaparthi on a short break, and he really felt very happy there. And on a whim, he decided, I wasn't even with him, to buy us a small home there. Shortly thereafter, we decided we wanted to relocate to Puttaparthi, and we decided in 2009, if we come to Parthi, we have 10 beautiful years with the avatar. Let's just not miss the opportunity. And because, all of us had done that smart mental calculation that Swami is going to be around with us till a certain date. And we said, okay, and when after 2020, we will dust our resumes and, go out there and make a living, and whatever people have to prove to the world, do the rest of that stuff that smart people do out there. So we decided to relocate to Puttaparthi, and within 2 years, less than 2 years, on 24th of April 2011, along with all of you and millions others, our lives turned upside down. And for a moment, it seemed like everything was over. And a lot of self-doubt set in. We kept wondering, did we imagine Swami's love for us? Did we imagine our love for Swami? Did he mean for us to make such a big move, to fold up our very well-entrenched lives of 20 years in a city and move here to do what? And the work, of course, was very therapeutic. As I was going along these lines, for a very long time, I felt that my story of love for God was an unrequited love. It was a story of a lot of unfinished business. I was in that space, and had this Samarpan happened when it was meant to happen, I was invited last year in November, on 18th of November, I beg your pardon, I would have told you that my story of loving God is one of unfulfilled dreams and unfinished business. But Swami is the master of time. And 9 days prior to that scheduled talk, I had a personal tragedy, and my father merged with Bhagwan. So I never made it to Samarpan in November. And about 2 weeks ago, I think Swami said enough is enough. And I happened to visit the newest campus of the Satya Sai University. I was very eager to see it. So I went to Mudanhalli to see Bhagwan's university's 4th campus. And a strange peace descended upon me and my family. And since the day we came back, we have had series of personal miracles happen, one of which was that we found ourselves going to Kannur for no obvious reason in Tamil Nadu, and witnessing more affirmations from Swami. And the message that I'm getting continuously from him is to never underestimate his presence in Prashanti Nilayam. Swami is hitting me on my head and drilling it into me that every time we inch towards the holiest of shrines on the face of earth, the Mahasamadhi of Bhagwan Baba, we are inching close to a personal audience with him. The Lord of Prashanti Nilayam has gone nowhere. He's very much here and will be here forever, as he is in Vrindavan. So, in a trice, all my grouses, all my grudges, all my anger against Swami, all complaints of unfulfilled promises, unfinished business, gone in a trice, in a second. And just the joy of knowing that Swami is there, not only for me, for every single person who calls him by any name. He listens. He's our breath. He responds. He cares deeply for us. And He will guide us whenever we seek His guidance is enough. Nothing at all makes the flute more giddy than to know that the Lord has chosen it as His instrument to blow His sweet breath through it. I'd like to close with the poem, just a few random lines that I picked from a poem written by Swami Ram Tirath. The poem is called Realization. So close, my darling, close to me, above, below, behind, before you, me, around me, without me, within me, oh me, how deeply, immensely, and intensely you be. O sweet myself, my breath, my day, my night, my shelter, my rest, my prayer, my fort. In Thee do I breathe. I beg your pardon. In Thee do I bathe, and in Thee do I swim. In Thee love and move, and of Thee full to brim. O ocean of nectar, in Thee let me sink. I think you, I drink you, I feel you, conceal you. I talk you, I walk you, I am you, reveal you. O lightning and rainstorm, O sunshine of smiles, I catch thee and hold thee, despite all thy guiles. Swami Ram Tirath. Thank you for the invite. Sai Ram.